Stanford University.
What we're going to do is in basically 3 stages, if you will, one fairly short stage. The first part is I'm going to ask each of the different panel members, or they can mix it up as they like, to give their thoughts on how you would create an interdisciplinary team and really the virtues that brings. And as I move into this, the second stage then will be that we have 2 different projects that have been presented to us that PIs would like to develop and have yet to develop a collaborative team. So we'll hear about those 2 proposal ideas, and then we'll have the panelists weigh in terms of how you would construct this interdisciplinary team. And then we'll open it up for dialogue. What I should also say in this is that really the focus and intent of this part of the dialogue is to talk about how we really expand the interdisciplinary nature of projects and try to bring about people on campus that haven't necessarily engaged in these EVPs yet. And what we would really like to do is, if you've already seen from these 6 projects, the interdisciplinary aspect has really enriched the ability to conduct these really dynamic research projects. And if we can continue that outreach, they'll only get better. And we haven't reached all of campus yet, and we would like to really increase that diversity of participation in the project. So that's really what we're trying to accomplish is in this part of the workshop, is addressing how we can continue to reach out to our colleagues across campus and pull them together to form these interdisciplinary teams. So with that, I will turn it over to the panel here to then hear their wisdom on how we would, the merits of developing these projects and how we would go about doing that. So maybe we'll start with Zephyr, and then we can move on to David and so forth.
Okay, thank you. I would just echo one of the recurring themes of the presentations, which is to come up with a question or a problem that everybody on the team can get excited about, sink their teeth into, and that, in a sense, the kind of question that is complicated enough, challenging enough, that it's going to demand the kind of interdisciplinary work in order to answer the question. And it strikes me that identifying a good problem, a good question, is the first and most important thing. Secondly, the other element that I think is critical for this is to form a team around a kind of common set of output or goal oriented elements of the project. So not only do you have a question that everyone agrees on and is excited about working on, but what are the kind of outputs? What are the final goals associated with the project? Those would be the 2 main things that I would focus on. The third thing I would bring up is the importance of involving, if possible, involving graduate students, postdocs, and kind of bringing other members of our academic community into the process. Again, they can often serve as the kind of glue, kind of centerpiece for these projects. At least that was the experience in our project. David?
Yeah, I'd like to begin. I may end up being the skunk at the garden party here, so I want to explain why I'm here at all. I've been on the EVP review committee for the last several years and co-chaired it the year before last with Chris Field and this immediate past year with Scott Fendorf. And so I'm here partly, like everybody else, to celebrate these projects that we heard about today, and I think it's quite fitting and proper to do that. But I do think we have a larger agenda here, which is to advance the mission of the EVP program in general. So let me just begin by asking, how many people in this room have never had any connection with an EVP project? Well, that's encouraging, actually, because you are why we did this. Right? You're the principal reason why we're here today, is not just to rehearse for ourselves what we've already accomplished, but to try to expand the community of researchers that take part in these kinds of enterprises. And I think David Brady may have some further things to say about this, but I think we've seen some very dramatic and I think very gratifying examples today of people who've collaborated with one another who might not have found one another in the great university landscape had it not been for the Woods Institute and especially the EVP initiative. But I do think there are other large sectors of the university community that simply haven't found their way to our door, as it were, particularly from the public policy community. I think there's been you see it today, and we've seen it over the years in the proposals that we reviewed, that there are precious few people who come to us as parts of teams who hail from precincts like economics, political science, law, behavioral psychology, sociology, anthropology. History, I'm very happy to say, is a partial exception to that. But there are communities of researchers on this campus that I think ought, somehow or other, we need to get the word to them about the availability of this resource and invite their participation in these kinds of programs. So I think this is a non-trivial issue, how to identify and interest and recruit people from beyond the confines of what I'll call the usual suspect disciplines, biology, environmental science, civil environmental engineering. No problem recruiting people from those sectors. But it takes a little effort to recruit the Zephyr Franks and the John Christensens of our community. And I think that's a real problem. Now, I think the problem actually has two different levels, one of which is kind of easy to conceptualize and the other a little more difficult. The first one is one that Zephyr just touched on, actually, is if you have a project, you're an individual researcher or an aspirant researcher and want to come to the EVP program, how do you promulgate to the university community at large what it is you're trying to accomplish and recruit people who might assist you in getting there? That's a relatively straightforward problem. But there's a second order of problem, it seems to me, that we've noodled about a bit at the Woods Institute, but haven't, to my way of thinking, haven't really got close to solving, is how can you incubate ideas amongst interdisciplinary communities of researchers who really can't conceive of what they want to do until they're somehow in the room together and beginning to tease the problem out. So recruitment for people in an already well-defined project, that's one thing, but conceiving of projects that are in their very nature interdisciplinary in innovative ways is a bridge too far for us, at least up to this point. So my maybe too cute term for this is that we need somehow to put together some kind of a vehicle or a vessel or a platform for what I'm going to call structured serendipity, where we can create venues where people will come together and talk to each other, and in that venue incubate research questions that will be interdisciplinary in their very nature.
Thank you. So I'm filling in for Frank Wolak. I'm Mark Thurber. I'm the Assistant Director at the Program on Energy and Sustainable Development at FSI. So I am part of this policy community that David is referring to. And so we have in our group people from a whole range of disciplines within the group. So political scientists, economists, lawyers, people with engineering training like myself. So it's very interesting for me to get more involved in this work. And I have to say from today, it's actually exploded some of my notions of what's possible with interdisciplinary projects, because my priors are that interdisciplinary work is very hard to do in a university. And I think, to me, in addition to the two things that David mentioned, I think there's some real structural obstacles that are important to think about having to do with alignment of incentives. Because I think a really key thing about an interdisciplinary project is, as Zephyr was mentioning, number one, it has to be something people get really excited about. And I think these are just great examples of that today. But then number two, and in addition to David's comments, you need to create a group of people where what they do both serves the interest of the project and also serves whatever their own incentive structures are. And just in my own experience, I've run into cases where people who are terrific people to work with and very civic-minded, but who've said, look, I'd really like to work on this, but I can't publish it in American Economic Review. Or, it's not going to help me get tenure if I'm on a piece that's co-authored with many people. So that, I guess, is just the idea that I would throw out there, is how we think about some of the structural challenges of people's incentives within the university, and particularly for young faculty.
I think those are excellent points, and I don't have anything to add in the nature of how we bring about the kinds of interactions that will help people find the things they're truly interested in together. And I think that is the fundamental thing. I think in terms of getting the incentive structure right, one of the things we have to do is capture the senior faculty. I mean, we always look at things in terms of the junior faculty have the new minds and the new approaches and the new opportunities to go somewhere. But there are disciplines within the university that are far more hierarchical than other disciplines within the university. And in those, if you don't capture the senior people, then the reward structure will never benefit the junior people. And often the senior people are past the point where they need to have the American Economic Review or any particular journal article. Got tenure. I've got all these rewards. I'm intellectually curious about this. And I think if you can engage those people in the process, then we have a hope of moving forward. And it's not true in every discipline in the university by any means, but it's very true in some. Beyond those questions, which I think are really among the most fundamental, just in terms of developing groups, agree with what's been said about making it real, having real projects of real interest to people, which is essential. Another point that's been alluded to in passing is, of course, respect for the different research communities and different cultures of the university is crucial, because the cultures within the university are very different. And you can't extrapolate from the one you know to all of the others in the university, even if it is the same institution. So there has to be respect for other ways of learning, but at the same time, not so much respect that you don't challenge each other. Because if you don't challenge each other, you're never really going to learn that culture. I mean, if I just listen to someone describe what's important in their field, that's cool. But if I'm really going to understand it, I'm going to have to say, you know, we think about that entirely differently in my field. And why do you think about it that way? And if you're not willing to ask those questions, you're not going to get there. And if you haven't found people who aren't threatened by those questions, but are rather challenged and stimulated by those questions, that's what you have to make progress with these. Now, there are lots of great people in the university who are challenged and stimulated by those questions. But basically, if you're not dealing with one of them, move on, because you ain't getting there. And a couple of other quick points. It does take time. Take the time. You know, it's not like walking down the hall to your colleague that you helped hire and you've been working with for a long time. You really do have to spend some time learning a language, learning a culture, and it's very much worth that time. And finally, really, there's no substitute for working with people that you really want to have a glass of wine with at the end of the day.
I'm here because David Kennedy wanted to make sure there would be someone have an even more depressing message. I work in political economy, and if economics is the dismal science, then think about politics, it's dismal squared. So let me point out what you said, the discipline thing matters. So I want to talk about like a clean air. I'll give you one example that's pretty famous that we all know. After the Clean Air Act passed in 1970, the question was there was a standard to be met, and there were two ways essentially to meet the standard of particulates in the air. One way was to burn Western coal, which was actually quite low in sulfur. And that would have been the efficient solution. Air all across the country would have been cleaner. But anybody who studies what I study said, well, that's never going to happen. What you're going to have happen is the scrubbers will be required in the West. And so it's easy enough to start out to explain that, because obviously the states that have the low sulfur coal are Wyoming and Montana. They have 2 representatives and 4 senators. And then look at the states that produce dirty coal. Those states are loaded with representative senators. And interestingly, it was called the Dirty Coal, Clean Air. The Western environmentalists and the environmental movement to this very day, membership is concentrated in Western states, not a lot of Sierra Club members in Detroit. And so the result of that is this combination of dirty air and clean coal gave us a bill which got us actually a little bit cleaner air in the West and inefficiency. So when I think of a water problem, as you bring it up here, I think, well, maybe the first way to think about it isn't the science. Maybe the first thing to think about is, well, there's a history of leases the way those leases are given in the West and in California. And so there's a bunch of water that goes to inefficiency here, where if somebody would think about efficiency, the water would go over here. And the science, I'm not knocking the science, but all of these things start with the science. And you add the other stuff later. What's not an add later, in my view, that's the question you got to start with. What would be the what does the science contribute? It's not necessarily the case that that's the efficient solution. The efficient solution might be change the law, do this, and that gets me to my last point, which is another reason why I'm not included in many of these. Which is the following thing is a problem that scientists have, in my view. That and first of all, I've spent a lifetime studying Congress. Talk about depressing. So legislators in particular are risk averse, and when technological solutions to problems come up, there are inherent uncertainties with those. There's no scientist who can guarantee if you fund this project or if you back this technology, it's over, baby. It's clear, the problem's gone away. For a large number of reasons, among them timing. Legislatures are great at the short run and the long run. California has a law passed that by 2050 we'll have clean air. That's great because they passed the law and nobody in the legislature at that moment will be alive and running at the time they pass it. So the point is that what happens is because legislatures have this uncertainty over what are the effects of the policy, and not just the effects of the policy on the country, the effect of the policy on me and my chances of getting reelected. So the person who represents Detroit, you can't say to them, oh, gee, you know, the real solution to the automobile problem is give up the industry. Let the Japanese and people who make them more efficiently, we'll just buy them. There's all sorts of countries where that happens. They're more efficient. But no, we don't do that. Why? Because you can't go home and run in Detroit and say, by the way, I saved every consumer $5,000 on every car you purchase. Unfortunately, all of you have to leave because there are no cars being manufactured here. So the point to be made about science, when a scientist enters into this, when there's this uncertainty, the science who prizes objectivity above everything else, you have to give it up when you step into that arena. Because you don't know for certain that the policy is going to work. The legislature is very uncertain about that. And you then have to step out and say, we believe this will work, and you're in the policy arena then. You're not in the arena of science. And in some sense, you have to give that up. So my view for if you want more people involved in this, call them up. No, you have to, it seems to me, you have to get them in earlier. And start with the notion that many of these problems, maybe the first solution, maybe the first way to look at it is the history and the politics and the economics of it, and the science might be secondary. So you can see why that's depressing, so that's it.
All right, well, thanks. Even with that...
You don't mean that. So
no, I do, actually. I'm depressed now, but no, I'm just kidding. That was actually really great from each of the panelists. And so what we'd like to do now is next hear two different potential proposals that have been effectively pitched, and are real potential proposals. These aren't fabricated by any means. We'd like to hear from the proposers, and then after we hear from them, we'll move to hearing from the panelists. And we don't necessarily have to go in order this time. We can have kind of more of an informal free-for-all on how we would approach those. So maybe, Pat, you want to go first? You could introduce your... If you would, that would be great. I'm Pat Brown. I'm the two of us presenting are both people who have a background in pediatrics, so we're trying to bring pediatrics to this movement, I guess. But no, that has nothing to do with my proposal. So I'm in the Department of Biochemistry. I've been at Stanford for 20 years in medical school. I would say most of my best scientific experiences have involved collaborations, multidisciplinary collaborations, and I probably have 100 papers with people who aren't in the medical school and stuff like that. So I totally appreciate the importance of collaboration. And but anyway, and my background is kind of like biochemistry, molecular biology, genomics, genetics, cancer biology, and stuff like that. So it's not the kind of stuff that people here do. My proposal, I sort of framed, I didn't realize it was a proposal. I just sent a two-sentence message basically asking, can I, get into this little forum here, but that's fine. So, because it really, it captures what I want. Basically, the gist of it is, maybe the quick backstory is, I had read a very interesting report that was published in 2006 by the UN Food and Agriculture Organization called Livestock's Long Shadow. It's really about the environmental impact of livestock farming worldwide. It was, I thought, a brilliantly put together book from the standpoint of data collection and integration, the sort of summing up the message is that if you wanted to pick a single human activity that is sort of distinct and identifiable, that does the most environmental damage on the planet, I think this could very easily be number one on the list. And on top of that, it's I don't want to reiterate this because it's probably familiar to everyone here, but you can ask me for the numbers if you want. On top of that, I think it's also probably the one that could potentially be changed with the least pervasive environmental impact. If you were to try to cut, power production, transportation by 50%, I think that, it would be essentially impossible to do without driving the economy to a halt. But I think it's actually feasible, but you can debate this, that doing the same with animal farming, it's much more manageable. It's a small fraction of the economic output of the world in dollar terms. It's obviously a more important factor in terms of the number of people engaged in it. But really what distinguishes it from the alternatives is maybe mostly aesthetics rather than nutritional factors and economics and policy. So I wanted to do a sabbatical, the mission of which is I want to diminish animal farming worldwide to the maximum extent possible. If I could eradicate it entirely, that would be good. Obviously, that's completely unrealistic. And what I want to do is to come up with a strategy, and it's all about politics, economics, psychology, trade policy, law, and stuff like that, and nothing to do with molecular biology. And I should say, I read this report, and I got off track, but it was brilliantly done. But then at the end, when they gave their policy recommendations, their conclusions were, this is a completely unsustainable, disastrous, activity. That is just, it's beyond unsustainable. And then their policy recommendations were, well, let's just tweak it at the margins and see if we can make it a little less awful. And my feeling was, no, they didn't get their own message. Their message is, let's go for it. The one thing I want to say also about my background, why I'm motivated to do something like this, well, I'm an incurable optimist. And maybe a more relevant thing than my scientific background is, 6 years ago, I had no business background, but I started a nonprofit publisher that used a new business model that all the expert people said was completely unsustainable, and besides it had more, all kinds of flaws. But it's now making a profit. It's a nonprofit, but it's sustaining itself from its earnings. It includes the largest, in terms of publication volume, scientific journal in history that was started just 3 years ago and is thriving and has very high impact and so forth. So, so I totally believe that you can do something outside your field. And in fact, you have the advantage, as I did in that case, of not buying into all the assumptions that the established people in that field have. I go into these projects thinking the conventional wisdom is probably wrong. If you're an expert, you're kidding yourself.
But I'm completely naive about this stuff, so I feel like I have a tremendous amount to learn. I've met a lot of people in this room. I've learned a tremendous amount from those conversations. Many of them are skeptical about the feasibility of this project, but they've given me very good advice, very good criticism, and you know, I would love to collaborate with anyone who is interested. And you know, the first step of the collaboration is just defining the goals in some realistic, practical terms, sketching out what are the strategic issues, and then just breaking down the problem and solving the pieces of it. So.
Okay. Notwithstanding that we have two rather expert people from FSC here that could probably be great at addressing this head on, why don't we first maybe hear from people here on the panel on if you were going to develop now a team of experts to go after that, how would you would go about doing that, and what disciplines you would call on, and how you would go about finding those people?
I guess just my first reaction, not being an expert in the topic, is a little along the lines of what David was talking about, because to me, when I heard this sounded like one of the most difficult ways to solve some of these problems, but I think that's coming from more of the politics side, and so that would be just my thought about it, that maybe there are two streams of this, and one is kind of a technical economic study of you know how easy it is in a technical sense to do this relative to some, and I don't mean technical just as far as the small scale, but also in a kind of a larger scale relative to alternatives. But then I think echoing the previous comments, to start from the beginning with some kind of interest group type political science analysis of what kinds of coalitions could actually make this feasible in a policy way.
I think, yeah. The way I sort of saw it strategically was the first order of business. I completely agree with you that that's coming up with a political strategy. I mean, again, I had the same business with this open access publishing thing. One of the things we did was we got the Congress to mandate that NIH-funded research gets deposited in a government repository within 12 months, which was very controversial. And it turned out that part of the way to do that was to recognize that someone who I polarized completely from in almost every aspect of politics. It was this nutcase conservative member of Congress from Oklahoma, Ishko.
Senator Coburn?
No, it was Ishko. Yeah. Who is the guy who is best known for every year introducing a bill to mandate prayer in school. But at any rate, but the point was that this is to frame this as a taxpayer issue, that you're not getting full value for your taxes if you don't have access to the output of the research. And it's kind of like the academic establishment is, is making this an insider's game. So, which is not really what I felt about it, but I felt like if I could get anyone in Congress on that side to buy into this, it would work. So he actually introduced the bill that did this thing that most people would say is like not what you would expect a conservative congressperson to do. So I believe you can have a political strategy even for something that seems counterintuitive, but you have to know what your goals are. And the immediate thing for me is I want to try to do at least a quick and dirty, sort of modeling of what an alternative world, or what sorts of alternative models could exist that would provide food security and not be just complete fantasy land and wouldn't necessarily be that close to my ultimate goal, and then build a political strategy around them. Because I think that you have to have some specificity there.
Well, and a political strategy, of course, is a totally different thing from a political analysis, right? So that's...
Well, I mean, you need, I guess, maybe a political analysis as a foundation for developing a political strategy.
If you've decided what the goal is before doing the research. Yeah.
Okay, well, part of this we need to do is have not just a creation of the political aspects, but how do we bring then a larger interdisciplinary team together to address this? And what are the other disciplines besides, say, the politics that we would want to put in this team? Right? I mean, it seems quickly from my perception on this, a lot of this would be social buy-in, right? It's not just political, but how do you convince?
Behavioral economics.
Yeah, exactly. So maybe we could hear some of that from. Or maybe not.
Don't look at me. Don't look at me. I'm one of those experts. That,
Maybe Roz could step in on this one.
Yeah, well, I just wanted to note that we have had an EVP on livestock before, and it did include the person who wrote the Livestock Long Shadow. So it was interesting that you started from that, and that was really on virtual trade of water and nitrogen through the growth in the livestock industry. But I was just talking to my colleague Pam Matson, who had to leave, and she and I started a very long collaborative project with other people in this room and outside in Mexico on intensification of food production systems that extended for a couple of decades, actually. But that started with a broader discussion at the Aspen Global Change Institute, where we came together on a much kind of broader level, saying, food and conservation, is it conflict or compatibility here? Will intensification save land for nature or not? That kind of broad thing. And from that, we came down to a set of issues that a whole wide range of people from different disciplines wanted to collaborate on. So one thing I would suggest, maybe if you took your example as one, that the Woods Institute might host a day-long broad set of discussions on, you could start with livestock or a broad topic, where people would come together and formulate potentially a set of things that they wanted to look at in collaboration that might include your take and other people's take, rather than start with your view and say, okay, do we want to buy into your view and get on your team, or have this as the broader topic that other people might shape your approach and you shape their approach at the same time. So I think the Woods Institute could play a pivotal role in having, and this was Pam's suggestion actually, having a day-long discussion on a few broad topics.
In other words, what would be how would you, if you had to have a title for such a forum, how would you frame it?
Wither animal production, question mark. Who wants to get in on which aspects of it and why, and see if there's a common research theme that could be developed here at Stanford. Because I think a lot of people might look at it from an antibiotics point of view, going into humans, to a land use point of view, to a political point of view, as there a regulatory approach to this, to a nutrients point of view that Peter and I and others have been working on lately. Contributing to, nutrient effluents, obviously, in bays and estuaries and so forth. And so there might be, taking a broader view for an hour, people might come together and let's say, let's take one little chunk of that and work on this together. So, I don't know, I'm trying to, I guess, raise it one little bit, because I think you're a starting point here, but people may come in, sort of agreeing or disagreeing, but wanting to bring their views in too, not feeling like they have to agree or disagree.
Sure.
Right from
Agree or disagree on the premise, or on?
Yeah, that we're going to eliminate everything. I don't know. I mean, I'm just saying.
But yeah, okay.
Yeah. So.
Rose, I think that's a really constructive suggestion, but the part of it I'd like to underscore is keeping the definition of the day-long forum, whatever it is, as broad as reasonable. And I take as my model in this the forum that the Woods Institute sponsored about, could be 2 years ago now, on water. A day-long discussion of water, out of which eventually came some very concrete and specific initiatives. But if the goal or the objective of the whole enterprise is stated ahead of time as we're going to eliminate livestock, I think that's not a way to invite all kinds of participants.
No. I don't expect. I want to collaborate with people who don't believe it's feasible or may not even believe it's desirable, but are willing to participate in working through some of the questions with an open mind. I feel like there's a lot of interesting questions there, irrespective of what you think the answer is going to turn out to be.
All right, we're running short on time here, so without beating that one down too far, why don't we move on next and hear from Carrie about, and maybe briefly, about what your potential proposal topic would be, and then we can have a dialogue on the approach that we take for that. Thanks.
Well, thank you for listening, and I really do appreciate this informal type proposal atmosphere, because we really do appreciate the feedback. I have just heard about the Woods Institute and just really have, via the mass email that went out, am learning more about EVP and what amazing projects have been able to be funded and really seeded so that this wonderful interdisciplinary interplay occurs. My background, again, is pediatrics. I take care of children, I take care of adults, but on the side I also have a laboratory, and so I do come at it like Dr. Brady was saying in terms of that primary science background. And I grew up as a daughter of one of the head marine biologists of the Environmental Protection Agency. His job was to clean up water outside of New Jersey. So I grew up on a houseboat in New Jersey, had terrible health effects, had terrible asthma, allergies. Hence, I've moved to California and have done much better. However, my premise was that there was something that the environment affected health, period. And I wanted to understand that better. And so for the past 3 years, I've been working with some children in Fresno, not just some, a huge cohort that's been studied for the last 8 years with geospatial mapping of their environmental exposures. And so what we have now is molecular links, it seems that, from what they're being exposed to and some epigenetic changes that are happening in some of their immune cells. And so because of that science, I'm here today because by going to that community every Tuesday, I've learned a lot of other issues that outside of the science have really been exploding in the Fresno community. A third of them are below the poverty line. They don't have access to health. Certainly they are not educated in terms of the exposures that these people are exposed to. This is the third most polluted city in the entire United States. So these things brought to my mind, how can I work within the Wood Institute? Here I am, a faculty member at Stanford. I want to be able to work with health policy experts, with sociologists. Fresno is also a crossroads of a lot of different cultures. Anthropology might want to be involved, and also legal. And where does this research take me? I could just leave it at the door and publish lots of papers about it. But that's not the type of person I am either. I want to exist within the multidisciplinary community at Stanford and see what legacy we can provide for enabling health policy changes for these families, and especially if Fresno can serve as a prototype, if Stanford can create through the WIDS Institute a type of methodology by which we create a prototype to allow other institutions or other environmentalists to think about other cities in the United States to take these types of steps forward. So that's why I'm here today. I have a lot of brainstorming ideas, but I very much would like to get feedback. So thanks.
That's a great framework. Okay, so with that, again, I'd like to first put the panel on the spot. And I shouldn't say this is just the panel. So just like Roz chimed in the last one, we'd love to hear from everybody in the audience. It's supposed to be a dialogue going about how we would develop these projects in an interdisciplinary team. So, but since I have the panel up here, I can put them on the spot, I will. Lisa? I see you kind of...
Yeah, I wanted to comment because I agree a lot with what David and Frank and others said about participation in framing the question. As a scientist who switched sides or pinched it and I'm now joined in anthropology, is opening up the dialogue to include different methods, qualitative, as well as being aware that some of the members that want to work on environmental justice or mobilization or organizing may not want to work with very large data sets, where they may want to look at power, resource access, and this goes with the cattle. You know, people may have that as a security net, social safety net, versus access. And so I know many more people would be open to involvement if their disciplinary approach was respected and recognized as contributing maybe to context or a different approach to that problem without needing to be part of a big engineering, science, you know, describing the toxins, that kind of thing. And I think that's one of the reasons a lot of the social scientists have not been engaged, because they don't see where they would fit in an interdisciplinary team with most of the scientists.
It's funny because I've been talking to the community asthma coalition people there, to really work with the community there, and there's such a great need for understanding the sociological networks there, and just anthropologically trying to understand the different cultures and how they're approaching, how they just approach healthcare. And that's part of that issue. So, yeah, I'm very, actually, I was an anthropology minor in college, so I would really love to be able to understand and
Yeah.
Jump in on some history. Right. So as a historian, a history grad student who worked on the first project about the butterfly, just a checker spot in the reintroduction, I'd say, I think everybody's emphasized the importance of meeting often and working on a common problem. But in this light, I mean, one of the great things for me was also that respect for my discipline was that I would ask questions differently. I would ask different questions. I would take the questions that the scientists were interested in, but I would go into the historical archives and find what could I learn from my disciplinary approach to the questions I was interested in the light of these bigger questions. And so I think that's also an important part of it, is the space to be able to like go away for a couple months, you know, and do your work, and then come back to this multidisciplinary context and continue that conversation.
I think one of, I'm Ade Mabogide from the Mechanical Engineering Design, and the two proposals are of interest to me. We have been working at the intersection of engineering and psychology. And what makes it interesting is I'm interested in the problem of creating equally attractive alternatives, which is what design does. So if we could imagine a world in which there are no livestock, then the issue has to deal with what are the alternatives, which then allows us to bring in some of the political questions. One of the tools that we have found very useful has been using video to instead create that alternative world, because it makes it then more tangible for people to begin to weigh the alternatives. So what I see happening is that in fact our science has to work much faster and engage with the humanities and arts in order to create those futures that people can find a place to begin to understand the narratives of those contentions. So it's really having taken us in the last few years to get out of our engineering mindsets and been working with a few people in the humanities and arts to see what is that alternative future and how can we bring it in a tangible form, not large scale, but in a scale enough for people to engage from other disciplines. And we've been a bit successful in drawing in people that we would not normally have spoken with. So that's the, no livestock, okay. That'll be an interesting one.
Jeff.
I'll just approach this from a different point of view, just to point out some of the work that you may not be familiar with. That's good. So we'll start with Jim Lakey, who's a professor in civil and environmental engineering. Many years ago, started working in Fresno with the Pickers children and looking at exposure. And had a huge project for many years, I'm not sure where it is now, on doing exposure analysis. Actually using some of the tools that Adi just talked about, using video tools. Looking at, for example, filming kids and just watching how many times they put their hands to their mouth and stuff like that. But this is all that stuff, this has been going on for a long time. Within your own school, Gary Schoolman and a number of others have been doing work together, and we've been working with them. Part of the cholera, cholera infections, the bed and stuff. So there are groups around, that share your interests and have been working with the Woods Institute. And we have, you might have missed it, but Grant Miller and Len Hildeman looking at, air pollution. Len Hildeman looking at aeroallergens and things in building and spores and stuff. So I think, I think if you, but what's missing really, it's all been sort of at the environmental science and engineering part. The social science part, I admit, has always sort of been lacking. And so how that gets developed, I suspect the best way, from my point of view, is for you to make these links and to see where it goes. But I think it sort of just takes the point I was going to make at the end and summing up, and that is, and I know Peter wants to say something, and that is, you've got to just keep trying. You submit a proposal, sometimes it doesn't work because it's flawed or it doesn't quite hit it. You're going to get feedback and you just got to keep trying again. But this is not a game where you try once and throw up your hands and walk away. It's hard stuff. So I encourage you, take those first steps, formulate something, give it a shot, and then see what happens. Anyway,
Go ahead.
I have a couple comments to offer. First of all, I've been attending these things from the time that SIE was first put together, and so it's been quite a transition to watch over the course of this time. My congratulations to everybody that's been involved. This is impressive, the degree to which you've been able to foster interdisciplinary work, and so quite a bit of good come out of it. A couple comments to offer. First is on the specifics on the. I would think about reframing from eliminating livestock production to examining the sustainability of food production. When you get, it fits very well into Wood's program. There are other experiences around, and then the disciplines that you can include are right down the list of disciplines that are already involved in other activities within Woods right now. Everything from health impacts, what when you change different types of food mixtures, how does it affect the health of people? Nutrition impacts, the politics of how you could possibly bring that about, and deal with some of the things David Brady was saying, like what kind of policies and could you expect to be able to pass to support that? What barriers do you run into? Food security issues and the environmental issues that didn't come up yet, the water pollution issues. There's a whole host of technical issues to discuss that turn on the scientists. Global warming impacts, energy use impacts. There's a number of things like that that all fit into this sustainability of food production that will point immediately at the inefficiency of meat production as a supply of protein for people. So there's a way to get what you want, I think, but reframe it. Then to bridge from the specifics of these current proposals to the general topics that were coming up at the beginning that had to do with how do we build and sustain interdisciplinary teams more effectively, and how do we grow more interdisciplinary topics instead of just bottom-up ones, which I attribute all the EVPs right now, but pretty much bottom-up, to actually have something that's more top-down. I think that's what you were getting at, David, that I think there's enough experience now that the people who've been involved in Woods already could convene and say, what are truly the global nature problems that we do need to address that an institute like this should be addressing? And maybe even bring in sponsors. My company is a sponsor of this program. We certainly have ideas that we think were meaningful and contribute to that. Start an RVP, RFP type process instead. Not instead, but in parallel to. I think bottom up is still good. Don't replace bottom up, but come up with another parallel track. And the rewards then become not. And there was a question about rewards, and I think that's very valid because. The way rewards get distributed and within university systems as well as other systems. But I think in the end what we've got to do, especially in the context of a program like Woods, we've got to rise above. And we've got to say that rewards will come. We've got to build that they will come kind of attitude. We feel the dreams here, but you have to really think that way. You have to rise to the level where you say, if you are really focusing on the world's great issues, and you're doing meaningful work in creating collaborations amongst people who are dedicated to contributing what they can with their skills and backgrounds and talents to resolving some of the world's great issues, what better reward do you want? And the rewards will come. And I believe that the rewards will truly come no matter what the systems are. And so if Woods stimulates that kind of thing, Woods will succeed in getting the right kind of disciplinary projects and teams that are sustainable. So,
Okay, let's hear from Peter and then from Steve.
My comment is back a bit in the discussion. I like what's gone on since, but one of the things we should realize is that one of the reason things work fairly well here is we are in fact a relatively small university. And so the communication among we don't have 15 resource economists here. So if you're a resource economist and want to talk to somebody, you've got to talk outside your field. And that's a weakness as well as a strength, because it means if you need a X, and I don't want to choose any discipline because someone will say, oh no, we have one of those. But if you want an X that is interested in some particular environmental issue, there's a really good chance he or she does not exist here on the faculty. And so one of the things that We all know this in all of our work. Very often our closest colleagues are in fact not at Stanford University. They're great people who are somewhere else. And the EVP program is designed to bring together faculty from Stanford University to collaborate, which in a sense neglects that fundamental aspect of our communication. One possible way to turn that problem to our benefit is to develop ways that a program in some stage of development could bring the right people from somewhere else who are good and recognized and quite different from the people here to discussions for seminars and so forth, where we could both have a chance to progress in thinking about what we should do, and I'm thinking particularly of both of your projects for that here, and also to legitimize that field of inquiry in the relevant disciplines in the university as a whole. So that would be a sort of answering David's, one of the techniques that we could think of for addressing David's concern.
Steve?
I wanted to follow up on your comments about the need for different levels of approaching these collaborations. And there's some of that going on in an organization that in some sense is a daughter organization of the Woods Institute, the Center for Ocean Solutions. And in that, the idea has been to try to articulate the large problems that are facing the oceans of the world, to identify particular strategic information that Stanford and the community here can provide to that, and then to march forward, not to just understand it, but to provide a solution to those problems. Along the way, all of us in all of those feel like we have to give up, or have to give over to the next set of people who can take the ball the next part of the way down the field. And the idea is to basically make a team that can do that. So we've been trying to do that strategically. It's worked a lot because I think we have the experience of the EVPs of bringing people together. We have the experience all the time now of people saying there are not enough social scientists here. And by the way, just because this is a good idea does not mean people will do it. And if they don't do it, it doesn't work. So I think part of what we're learning is what it takes to create a solution. And the types of people who, as Peter was saying, really are interested in being part of that. It isn't going to solve all problems, but it's an example of exactly what you were talking about, trying to create an institution that fosters that, not only things from the ground up, but also saying, what are the big problems? What can we agree on? What can we have some traction with?
Okay. With that, we need to actually move on to the next step. So I'd like to thank all the panelists again for being up here. I'd like to thank the project pitchers as well, and all the audience for participation. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Jeff and Buzz.
For more, please visit us at stanford.edu.